So this panel discussion is around DAO strategy and Orbit. Just to start with the scene for the ones that don't know what Orbit is. So Orbit is a framework for launching customizable chains within the Arbitrum ecosystem. So it allows developers to create their own dedicated chains, to customize them technically according to their project needs. And to talk about this today, we have an amazing panel. So we have Patrick from the Arbitrum Foundation. We have Matt from Logworks. We have AJ, Chief Strategy Officer at Off-Chain Labs. We have Iron Boots, co-founder at Camelot. And we have CoinFlip, contributor at GMX. So I want to start with a question per panelist. I want to start with AJ. You've dedicated lots of time thinking about the design of Orbit. So what are the main selling points about Orbit?
Yeah, first of all, thanks to everyone for coming. It's exciting to see how big the Arbitrum community is growing, and it's incredible to see so many contributors, that are outside of the foundation, off-chain labs, etc. And this is the real lifeline, of the community. So I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for showing up. To answer your question, give me a second to step back. And it's very important, I think, to understand there's a lot of teams that want to launch their own chains, and we should want them to launch their own chains. They don't want to launch on a public network, and that should be fully acceptable, right? The question, though, is what is the alignment with the Arbitrum community, and how do we structure that? And the way we structured Orbit was if you launch a layer 3 on top of Arbitrum 1 or Arbitrum Nova, essentially a DAO-governed chain, that's a permissionless activity with a lot of natural network effects between Arbitrum public chains and your network. There's a lot of teams that don't want to do that, and again, that's totally perfectly acceptable. In those instances, what they do is they can launch a layer 2, which is the more frequently approached model. There's about 10 teams that are already currently building layer 2s with the Arbitrum tech stack, or they might want to launch layer 3s on top of other layer 2s, like on Base or Polygon or something. And with a 10% chain revenue contribution to the Arbitrum DAO, they can do that permissionlessly. And it's been a really exciting innovation to ensure that the community license allows the teams to have the flexibility to do what they want. They don't have to opt in to a very rigid governance structure, either around interoperability or the code stack. And they can really just push forward with what they want. In terms of what is the value propositions of Orbit, the killer features that we see from teams typically revolve around the block times. Arbitrum block times is, if you've used the network, are incredibly fast, 250 millisecond blocks. Most of our competitors are 2 seconds. And I'm sure there's technical reasons for those distinctions, but especially in gaming, it's like a very snappy feel, 250 milliseconds, and we see that as a huge driver. The other one is stylus. So for those that aren't familiar, it's currently on testnet. Again, it feeds into this theme of freedom, right? With Arbitrum Orbits, you can launch it however you want, wherever you want. Stylus allows you to use languages beyond the EVM. You can use Rust, C, C++ in a fully interoperable mechanism. There's a lot of teams that are taking advantage of that, both because they want the flexibility, especially gaming studios, but also they want to do things that are just impossible in Solidity. They're too expensive. Whether that's fully homomorphic encryption, other sort of precompiles, cryptography, etc. Just more advanced libraries they can take advantage of. Those are the two most frequently associated. The third, I would say, is use of custom gas tokens. So we have in our SDK that you can use your native gas token, fee token, and that was a big factor in ApeChain deciding to choose the Arbitrum technology stack. They wanted Ape to be at the core of what they were building. And then technical maturity of the stack, right? If you want on day one, you can adopt all of the Arbitrum governance modules. You can be decentralized from day one if you want. Again, a lot of teams choose not to, but that optionality, especially for teams that are maybe more, compliance or regulatory focused, that's mattered to them. So I spoke for a while there, but yeah.
Yeah, thanks. So you talk about licensing, and I know that Patrick from the foundation, he's been working around that. So Patrick, can you explain around the licensing?
Yeah, so before I joined Arbitrum, Arbitrum had a BSL license, business source license, and the idea was that you'd have to contact either the foundation or off-chain labs, or you could do a DAO vote, or you'd also do a DAO vote eventually to get a license. But I have a question for everyone here in the room. If you're going to launch your chain tomorrow, do you want to ask someone for permission to use the license? Who would want to do that? Anyone?
No.
No one wants, exactly, no one wants to do that. It's annoying for you because you have to come talk to us and convince us to give you a license. And on the other side, we're a gatekeeper. We have to try to select the right projects to get the right license. And that's just not great for anyone. It's like the worst scenario possible. So that was my argument for why we should change the license. And, thankfully we were able to do that. But on the flip side, a purely open source license also sucks because a competitor can take your code, fork it, launch, and then compete against your own ecosystem. And we've seen that several times in the past, and that's just awful. It doesn't really align incentives between the community that gave birth to this software and then the people forking it to compete against you. So the question was, could you have something in the middle where it's still fully customizable, you can modify it to suit your business needs, but you could be aligned with the community? And that was called the Arbitrum Expansion Pack. Or another way to look at it is like a community source license, where as long as you fork the code and you do cool stuff, and you share some of the revenue back to the DAO and our community, then everyone wins. You help fund the future development of the software stack, and then you become eligible, hopefully, for programs in the DAO as well. So that was like one of the real big motivations. You remove the gatekeepers, you help align the forks and the community, and then we can all just work together, and hopefully we can have thousands of orbit chains, and we have thousands of orbit chains. That could be a great revenue stream for the DAO, make the DAO sustainable, and then, of course, contribute back to all the orbit chains as well. So to me, it was like a win-win situation for everyone, which is why I was really excited by the expansion program.
So next question is for Matt. So you spend a lot of time researching the different layer 2 stacks. How does the Orbit stack compare to competition?
I think the BSL and now the community license really set it apart from most of the other rollups. As far as launching L2s and L3s, it kind of looks the same across pretty much all the rollups. I think Starknet coined this term fractal scaling, which is the idea that you have L3s and L4s, rollups built on top of other rollups. So in that regard, most of the existing rollups today look pretty similar. But as far as the BSL, that's one place that Arbitrum actually sets itself apart from other rollups. Most of the other ones are completely open source, so it's extremely easy to just go fork their code base and do whatever you want with it. While this might seem attractive to roll-up teams, it means that for the original creators of the technology, there's no alignment with the those creators or the DAO or anything of that nature. So, for example, BNB chain went and forked Optimism, and they have it settled to BNB chain. So not only does it provide no value to Optimism or Optimism DAO, but it provides no value really to Ethereum. So obviously, balancing these trade-offs is tough. You can look at the Cosmos SDK as a good example of, the perils of completely open source, free to fork. At the end of the day, like Cosmos Atom hasn't really been able to capture any value from the plethora of valuable chains that are using their stack. So it's, seeing the community license is really a step forward and sets itself apart because it both gives flexibility to roll up teams and it also forces alignment between the Arbitrum DAO and the Arbitrum protocol as well as these new roll up teams.
One thing to add to that, and I think it's the important flip side, is as you create more alignment with orbit chains, it becomes easier for the DAO and, by extension the foundation, obviously to a lesser extent, to justify investment in these orbit chains, right? So again, it might feel great to be able to just fork the code, and a lot of teams are giving grants for people to fork the code, but that's not sustainable. So this is a very sustainable model for the orbit chains to get investment from the DAO and to create, a reflexive cycle.
Awesome. So next question is for CoinFlip. So GMX announced the GMX chain last week. What are the drivers that led you to consider the GMX chain?
Hi. Okay, let me caveat this. What we announced was a lot of effort that's being done by our contributors on looking at what a GMX chain could look like. And I think just to maybe use an interesting example, when GMX deployed on effectively day 0 of Arbitrum launching, it was a protocol that had existed elsewhere but was fine-tuned based on what we believed Arbitrum could allow us to do. And if I sort of say that, if I think of developers like artists, that same team went and we've been working away and we've launched a GMX v2, which was after spending a year and a half, 2 years working on Arbitrum, seeing the best of what we could build with this tech stack and build products that could leverage this tech stack. The fact that, the 250 millisecond block time we were talking about, it's led us to sort of, multi-block transactions in a way that was, extremely exciting for users, felt instant, felt snappy. It meant we were able to sort of go a step further. And I think one of the big things that we've talked about here with Orbit chains is that you do have the freedom to customize them. You do have the freedom to take this space that you're working on and form it to really make the best experience possible. So I think a lot of our thinking is that let's look at what we can do with the Arbitrum tech stack and potentially do more. How can we make this experience even better for the users of our protocol? How can we leverage the liquidity layer that we have in Arbitrum 1? How can we take these things and go further? And I think that's one of the wonderful things, that we're not constrained by, well, this is all a chain will let you do. The chain can now be also what you need it to be. And I think that's what's driving a lot of our thinking.
Awesome. So I actually have a second question for you.
Do you actually mind if I just add something to that real quick?
Yeah, of course.
I think that there's this misinformed narrative going around that like launching a rollup with Arbitrum constrains you in some way, when the reality of it is launching an Arbitrum Orbit rollup gives you far more freedom compared to something like the OP superchain. For example, like with Optimism in the superchain, you actually have to have the OP token govern your rollup and decide on upgrades. Whereas with Arbitrum, you actually have the ability to have your own token, not only as gas for the rollup and then, transactions, but also govern your ecosystem. So there's this weird narrative for some reason around Arbitrum that you don't have as much customization, flexibility, ownership, control. But the truth is it actually provides a lot more flexibility than a lot of the competitors. So it's something that, I think the DAO really needs to consider. How do we change this narrative? How do we inform teams looking to launch rollups about the benefits of launching on Orbit versus, competitors?
Thank you. Coin, back to you. So you hate the word Orbit.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, I feel the word Orbit doesn't communicate what you're able to do with one of these chains. And just like, be it L2s, be it L3s. I don't think it's about them revolving around Arbitrum, which I guess is kind of the way that you might think about it. I kind of think, as I said, you have the freedom to build these chains the way you want them to be. So I don't have a better word yet, but I definitely think that, I think we definitely should find a way to communicate that what we're today calling Orbit chains, they elevate Arbitrum. They make our ecosystem stronger. They make us something greater, right? And there's a strength in the diversity of what's going to be built within our ecosystem. So yeah, we need to find a way to, highlight that, that ingenuity, that freedom, that experience. Just to like give a little small history lesson, as a protocol that deployed on Arbitrum at the very beginning, Arbitrum was a place where anyone could come and deploy. It was, by the way, a huge differentiator compared to Optimism. If you weren't in the ivory tower and you didn't have access, you could not deploy there. I was just so anti-crypto to all of us. And a generation of builders, and I guess generations only a year or two in crypto, who were able to come to Arbitrum can now do the same thing with what we're doing with Orbit. So I think we just really have to find a way to communicate that opportunity that we're giving everybody in the space.
Can I ask a question to the audience? Who's excited for Orbit? Raise your hand if you're excited by the idea of Orbit chains. Hundreds of them. Okay, we have a lot of work to do then. That's a very tough crowd.
Awesome. What?
Who's excited for Orbit chains on the panel?
Yeah.
Awesome. So last question, it's for Iron Boots. So you are actually taking a different approach. You're not going for your own Orbit chain, but you are looking to integrate your decentralized exchange in the different Orbit chains. So why are you choosing this?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think Camelot, we are in a different position to, most people here, but also most different projects involved with Orbit chains. Because most projects at the moment involved with Orbit chains, they're either service providers to actually spin up the chains, or they're the chain builders themselves. So we're slightly different in that we actually want to deploy on the chain. And I think our reasons for this is because Camelot's business model is to be basically as deeply aligned to Arbitrum as possible. I'm going to use a word that scares a lot of people in crypto, but the best way we can do that is to build Camelot as a profitable business. And we do that because if we can generate enough value for builders and for the ecosystem and capture some of that value, we can build a business that is genuinely sustainable and scalable. And that's basically what we've done on Arbitrum 1. And a couple of months ago, Orbit started to come on our own radar, and it became very clear that it would likely be the most used roll-up stack in crypto, and that when you compare a couple $1,000s a month to build your own roll-up and use your own gas token, it's an inevitability that people will use it. So I think we're months away from like this really big surge of Orbit chains. I think a lot of people are going to question, which is a very valid question, of why do we need it? And does everybody need to be an Orbit chain? And does every Orbit chain need a DEX? And the answer to all of those questions is, I don't know. But that's the point of the market and sort of the tech cycle we're in, where its inevitability is there, but it would be almost just arrogant to say you know exactly how it's going to be used, right? Like we're seeing it for gaming projects a lot, where if you have your own tribe that doesn't require like DeFi liquidity, it makes sense to sacrifice the composability of being on Arbitrum 1 to be your own chain and to capture that value, right? So for Zai, for example, we're going to deploy on Zai, and that makes a lot of sense because you're going to have liquidity needs for in-game tokens, etc. But most of the liquidity for like Zai itself will remain on Arbitrum 1. So for us, it's just about, again, like literally trying to support Arbitrum builders, generate value. And like I said, I don't think there's anybody else really in a position that could do this if they wanted to. So for Camelot, we felt that, again, like it's part of our goal to like really align ourselves to the Arbitrum roadmap. And like nobody's going to tell us to do that, right? And like I said, we do that because we see the value potential there. And we see 20, 30 different Orbit chains that are being built. And if we can try and make that kind of a cohesive ecosystem, instead of just being 100 random rollups, if we can make it feel like Arbitrum, right? Like, because part of this is the tech, but the main thing that users care about is the UX and the feel. So I think that's kind of really where we're trying to position ourselves, where just like Camelot is kind of the ecosystem hub on one, where you discover all the tokens, you farm all the tokens, you find all the launches. If we can kind of take that approach to Orbit chains and use that as like an aggregation point for a user, then like that's a net win for everybody. So
just one thing to add, I think that both Iron Boots and CoinFlip brought up is the Orbit strategy really aligns, I think, with the early days of Arbitrum around sustainability. You know, when we drafted the initial draft, like I guess published Arbitrum Constitution, that was one of the key tenets, was sustainability. And the reason for that, I think, for both the network, the ecosystem, and also the builders, is we've all seen, if you've been in this space for more than 5 years, the ebbs and flows, the highs and lows of networks. And a lot of that, frankly, I think has to do with a lack of an eye towards sustainability. You know, corporate governance with tokens and distributions and grants is not where you typically see it, for example, with like public companies or, you know, other organizations and foundations. So I think that the way that the Orbit strategy has been structured is to try and maintain that sustainability and growth as much as possible, so that Arbitrum will continue to remain at the forefront, continue to grow its lead amongst both the public L2s and also the adoption of the stack as a general.
Thank you. So Iron Boots touched on this a bit. Wanna focus on it. So for open to everyone, for other builders that are out there, they are looking into the different chains. So what are the considerations that they have to be thinking about when they are thinking, should I build an Orbit chain, or should I go on one, or should I be on Nova?
I can speak a little bit on this, but I also want to mention how something that Iron Boots alluded to, which is defragmenting liquidity across all of these different Orbit chains. You know, if you have a DEX who has the ability to do simple user experience bridging and, you know, makes it feel like it's one unified ecosystem that is the Arbitrum Orbit, all of a sudden Arbitrum Orbit has this leg up compared to every other tech stack. So having someone like Camelot have that as a mission is definitely very beneficial to the Arbitrum stack. If you're going to launch a rollup today, I think there's a lot of things to consider. Like, you know, at first you're going to be like ZK rollup or optimistic rollup. And then if you're going the ZK route, you have to realize that you're going to have expensive transactions for a really long time. Like until there's a high enough throughput, until hardware gets better, like ZK rollups will be more expensive than optimistic rollups, if ever cheaper. So I think that's kind of the first thing to think about. The second thing to think about is the users in an ecosystem. So Arbitrum happens to be really unique in its user base. I think everyone here probably knows Arbitrum, largely thanks to these two, is home to many, many DeFi degens. So being Arbitrum affiliated definitely gives you this leg up as far as actual real users who want to go play around with new products, who want to go use new things. Outside of that, I think that it would be important to think about, what infrastructure actually exists. So that's something that's not very good today on Orbit or anywhere else. So who will be my RPCs? Who will be, what block explorer am I using? And unfortunately, no ecosystem today offers like great out of the box solutions for that. Like you can go launch a roll up with Conduit or Caldera, but there's still a lot of other things you need to think about. But I think that's something that's on both Off-Chain Labs, the foundation, and the DAO's mind. So likely, will be something that is uniquely fixed in Arbitrum in the near future.
Yeah, can I jump in quickly as well? Just I think I'm doing lots of raids of hands today, so just to get everyone's attention, I want to understand, I want you all to understand the motivation for rollups before you decide how you pick your chain. So raise your hand if you've ever lost money on a cryptocurrency exchange because it got hacked or anything else. And don't worry, I'm not the tax authority. Oh, that's awesome. So that's really important. I know, exactly. But this is really important because let's say you're a startup today, you want to offer a service to your users, you've got to take the Web2 tech stack, build it up, take custody of billions of dollars, offer this service to your users, then you get hacked, you lose all the money, and that's annoying for you and the user. You don't want to lose their funds. And you want to offer a service and earn fees for doing that. And Rollup as a tech stack offers you that. Rollups protect the operator. The operator doesn't have to take custody of your funds, and it protects the user because the user can audit in real time that the operator is always doing the right thing. They're fully collateralized. The system is running as intended. Is exactly what you'd want out of a service, or out of a off-chain system that's offering you a crypto service. So then the question is, what chain would you pick? What is the best tech stack for doing that? And one way to look at that is, you can always look at the characteristics. Do I want ZK? Do I want Celestia as my DA layer, etc.? But more importantly, what you want is a battle tested system. So if you look at the rollups today for the past 2 years, Arbitrum and its competitors, what we're really doing today is battle testing the technology with TVL, transactions, DeFi applications. And as this gets battle tested, you gain confidence that the system works. It really does protect the funds. It really does ensure that the system is fully collateralized. You get all these nice guarantees. So you really just want to pick the chain that has been battle tested with the technology that actually does protect the funds. For example, if you're missing fraud proofs, then you're not battle testing anything. You really want to battle test. You want to use the system that is battle tested with the technology that will protect you and your user. So that's all I would say on that topic.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to Matt's point, which I think is very pertinent of Arbitrum's strength right now is that it is basically one of the biggest DeFi chains that exists. And I think if you ignore the metrics, which are obviously very large, it does just have kind of one of the most diversified DeFi ecosystems, which I think you can see in many places. And that's why this model of orbit chains and the specific reason of how they share value with Arbitrum One itself is so significant, because it actually is a positive for the scaling, right? We know that the roll-up future is inevitable, like Celestia, DYM, literally every hyped protocol at the moment is kind of around this roll-up modular world. But again, the truth is nobody knows how this materializes. So I think the way that Arbitrum has kind of positioned itself now allows for that to scale in many different ways whilst actually capturing the value. And I think, most importantly, Camelot, we're speaking to a lot of these orbit chains, and the reality is that a lot of them are looking to come from maybe mainnet, OP, another L2, and they want to start with Arbitrum One as their base, So a lot of these guys actually include Arbitrum One as part of this journey anyway. So I think you're going to continue to see these big NFT gaming ecosystems, they're probably going to come to One, bootstrap a bit of a community, bootstrap some liquidity, some TVL on One with everybody else, and then they might decide to go outwards. And that's literally the best flow you could have, right? So I think just in terms of practicality of what people will actually use and what people need and will use in the market today, that's where the orbit chain stack is really second to none. So it's, there's a lot of hype out there and a lot of bullshit narratives, but in terms of what people actually use and want to use, ignoring all of the Twitter silliness, I would put my money on Arbitrum, which, yeah, we are.
Thanks for providing that advice for builders.
No financial advice.
Never financial advice. So what do you think the DAO should do to foster a community of developers around Arbitrum orbits?
Iron Boots was saying this to me earlier, so I feel bad stealing his point, but provide better infrastructure for these builders. So whether it be like out of the box, Block Explorer, RPCs, subgraphs, plenty of other things that are kind of missing from the stack that if you're a roll-up dev, you have to figure out how to do on your own. Like if we as a DAO can help provide some of these services, whether it be, subsidizing them or having partnerships to allow for the cheapest possible price or something of that nature, all of a sudden, roll-up devs will, likely find Arbitrum as their home more attractive. Additionally, I think that things like better user experience between roll-ups, so bridging, that's very necessary. At the end of the day, today, the biggest issue faced when using roll-ups is the fragmented liquidity. So if you want to go do something on Arbitrum 1 and then you wanted to go do something on Xi or some other roll-up built with the Arbi stack, the experience of actually going from one chain to the other is kind of a pain in the ass. And frankly, it's something that needs to be fixed across the entirety of the space, defragmenting the liquidity in this modular future. So those are the two that definitely come to mind. And I want to hammer down on what Pat said a second ago, which is having active tested fraud proofs for years is something that I don't think any other stack, active tested proof system for years is something that I don't think any other stack can tout as an honor. So Arbitrum definitely has a leg up there.
I think, like Sobi said it in the last panel, the Arbitrum DAO has like $7 billion in assets. And obviously most of that is the native token, but they hold like $40 million in ETH. When you think about orbit chains, and again, this whole idea of sustainability and freedom, I think creativity and flexibility in how you invest in teams building orbits is going to be really important, right? So like the model of just a conversion for sequencer fees will work for some, but it won't work for others, right? Because there's going to be a lot of folks that are going to want to just not have any fees at all because they want to, tie it to like the NFT marketplace, for example. And building structures within the DAO to have that flexibility to respect the business models of the teams that are building orbits, but at the same time, not leak value in terms of how you support them, I think is probably the most important point to solve, because the DAO can make great investments, take great opportunities if it has that flexibility and creativity. Thank you.
So very quickly, we have 30 seconds before we give the word to the audience. If someone here wants to go today and start being onboarded on Orbit, what do they have to do? What do they have to go? What resources do they have?
So at Off-Chain Labs, we built an SDK to easily deploy an Orbit stack on a testnet. And you can have a lot of customizations around that, AnyTrust versus rollup, native fee token versus ETH, how many validators you want, contract size limits. We have all these different flexibilities. We only deployed it for testnet because we don't want people to just YOLO launch rollups and not understand what they're doing. Most of the teams that are building orbits are working with what we call rollup as a service providers. The publicly announced ones that support Arbitrum, I hope I don't forget anyone, are Caldera, Conduit, AltLayer. I think Zeev is announced. There's a couple more that are still in the process of adding support. And most teams, that's how they're going to go to mainnet. With either rollup as a service provider or doing it in-house if they have that capabilities. I wouldn't recommend solo devs YOLOing to mainnet and asking people to deposit meaningful funds, because you have to understand the tech stack well and, the DevOps associated with it.
Thank you. So being told there's no time for Q&As, I'm sorry, time is running. I want to thank this amazing panel today. It's been awesome to go through the vision, the strategy, what's the progress so far with Orbits and how to get started on Orbits. Just want to end with that this Friday, Arbitrum is organizing an event that's called Shake Shack, so don't forget to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you.